So I think we are live. Let me just check if YouTube says we are live, but it looks pretty good. Let me just open the tab here. But yes, we are live. Hello and welcome back, Friends Validator community. Finally back from Colombia and finally here in an environment with the rest of the studio. So very happy to start recording again. And today we will kickstart the conversation with with something very big. We have the pleasure to invite DYDX to today's live stream. I kindly welcome Paul. He works for DYDX, and we will talk a little bit about what the status is in regards of the mainnet and so on and so forth. So before we do that, Paul, welcome. How are you doing?
Doing great. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Yuri.
Yeah, likewise. And before we dive super deep in what's going on at DYDX, would be like super cool if you could like briefly explain what you do at DYDX and how you ended up there, so to say.
Awesome. Yeah, so I lead the business development team at DYDX. I think across crypto business development can mean a lot of things. I guess just like across all business development roles, but at DYDX it means a lot of things. So I think traditionally a lot of people think of business development as institutional sales, and that's pretty important, right? On the exchange side, especially when you have like a full order book model, it's really important to have liquidity, right? So a lot of just talking with crypto native hedge funds, traditional hedge funds, and making sure they're providing liquidity across all asset pairs, making sure dynamics in the market are good at all times in terms of incentives, and to kind of just get rid of toxic behavior in terms of trading flow. And then more generally, just product partnerships and some product related stuff, specifically when it comes to the next version of the DYDX protocol v4, the DYDX chain. A lot of what I do is partnership related, working with validators such as FRENS and other validators in the ecosystem. We'll get into the timeline a little bit, but launching the private testnet pretty soon. So making sure that infrastructure is there, front end infrastructure for centralized exchange deposits, etc. But yeah, it's mostly partnership and product related, and then some stuff having to do with liquidity management.
Nice. Sounds very exciting. And you mentioned it. You start working more and more with validators. The reason why is because DYDX decided to launch its own chain. So could we like zoom out real quick? Because most of our community members are like from the Cosmos ecosystem and may not so familiar with the Ethereum ecosystem, but DYDX is one of the OG DeFi protocols on Ethereum. And then earlier this year, you all of a sudden decided to launch your own Cosmos chain. So could you reflect real quick, why you decided to do so? I mean, you have been a very big player, in the Ethereum eco. So why did you came up with the idea to launch your own chain?
Yeah, so as an overview for those who don't know, DYDX is the leading perpetuals DEX. We do about $2 to $3 billion in daily volume. And we currently use StarkX zero knowledge proof rollup and settle on Ethereum. The reason why we have such large throughput is we host the order book off chain on a centralized server. So we're kind of a hybrid DEX right now. But we truly believe the best product experience is one that's fully decentralized. I think this is a perfect time for this podcast because this was highlighted even more recently with all of the stuff that happened with FTX and all the centralized lending protocols like BlockFi, Celsius, Voyager beforehand, where you see even more highlighted how decentralized products are going to be the best product experience, it being non-custodial, being fully transparent, fully on chain. And that was our vision from the beginning. So the goal is to make all parts of the stack censorship resistant. And while the exchange is currently non-custodial and has decentralized parts, the obviously having a centralized order book on a centralized server, even though it's off chain, is not ideal. So the goal for the next version of the protocol was try to create the same product experience we have now and then continue to improving over time, but also have all parts of the stack fully decentralized, right? because a chain is only or a protocol is only decentralized as its least decentralized part. So us having that central order book off chain was not decentralized and not censorship resistant. So we decided to move to Cosmos mostly because the technology and SDK allowed us to build something a little more proprietary, which is having the off-chain order books in a decentralized fashion. So all of the order books will be hosted in the internal memory of the validators. And yeah, we're going to be shipping a bunch of executables, and everything should be pretty easy for the validators to implement. But that's the main reason for us switching over to Cosmos, to kind of create a fully decentralized version of this protocol in a time where it seems most necessary.
That's very interesting, because when I've also read your Medium blog post about your decision for the very first time, I also read that UX was a big and important part, because now with your own blockchain, you have more customization possibilities here and there. But yeah, you mentioned the decentralization aspect from the order book perspective. So my question now is, do you think that you have pioneered a certain path here with DYDX? So do you believe that other protocols that are on Ethereum today will realize that there are certain advantages when launching your own chain in regards of order book decentralization? So do you see DYDX as a pioneer here?
Yeah, definitely. I think we are a pioneer. I think we always have been. We basically invented we invented the DEX aggregator with one of the last versions of the protocol. And like obviously a lot of protocols are now using zero knowledge proof rollups, right? And I think we were the first to pioneer that. In terms of application specific blockchains, I think it will be very revealing, and DYDX is a test case of whether this will succeed or not. However, I don't know if every single protocol makes sense to switch to an application-specific blockchain. I think it makes a lot of sense for DYDX given our resources. I think like certain other DEXs might move the same way, such as like Uniswap, maybe some other larger DEXs. However, like it is very intensive, even with like SDK and Tendermint infrastructure for validators. It is very intensive to build your own blockchain, right? So given like the resource constraints, I'm not sure it's like the way to go for every project, but I do think for like some of the larger protocols and those that have the resources that are necessary, like application specific blockchains allow for a lot of augmentability and a lot of autonomy. So I think it is definitely the future.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take, and let's stick to that like for a second. So we clearly talk about the app chain thesis here. So do you think that reason number one why a lot of protocols stick to the layer once they are on top of it is like a question of resources, and B, if DYDX would need to launch like completely newly, like let's say tomorrow, let's say DYDX would not exist today, but it would exist tomorrow, would DYDX immediately have become its own chain, or would you still decide to launch on a layer one first? That would be actually very interesting to know.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think now, knowing what we know, we would probably just build the current tech, right? And the reason we knew to build the current tech was kind of what happened in the past, right? So I think it was a stepping stone for us building on L2. DYDX always knew it wanted to move to this path. We didn't know that we exactly wanted to be built in Cosmos, let's say a year and a half ago. However, a year and a half ago, 2-3 years ago, we knew that we wanted to build a fully decentralized product. So we knew that the L2 protocol was just a stepping stone, and we knew all along that we want to be able to decentralize all parts of the stack. However, I don't know if that would have been possible necessarily without us like having these stepping stones in between. I think like the success of the L2 platform obviously drove our name, gave us a lot more resources to be able to invest in this. So it was definitely big for us. And we're really excited to devote pretty much all those resources to building this next product. But yeah, it's a really good question. I think like knowing what we know now, we would probably dive right into building this protocol, but that's like easier to say than do, given that the resources might not have existed otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's a very justified way to look at it, and also like to be fair, like layer twos have seen like an enormous boom last year, mid last year. So Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth behind that. But now, again, you are becoming your own chain, but you are not alone with that. So there are also other protocols that have the same design and are like trying to solve the same problem, so to say. For example, Injective or like Say, which is also coming up. So how do you see the competitive landscape in the Cosmos in that sector, and how is DYDX different or will be different?
Yeah, really good question. I think DYDX's competitive advantage is honestly, again, resources and just like our engineering team. I think we have like one of the best engineering teams in crypto, and we've just been proven time to time again to be able to execute. So I think that's definitely to our advantage. And I will say, take a step back. Listen, like I want every protocol in DeFi to hopefully succeed, right? Especially now more than ever when there's like in groups and out groups, right? And everyone from the outside is fighting us now. Crypto is evil after what happened to FTX. It would just be impossible for us to succeed if we were also like fighting within each other, right? So like hopefully all these protocols are going to succeed. I think we do have a lot more resources given like our history. However, like, yeah, we're on the page where I think we're all on the same page and that we need a policy push, that we need to like help the Hill understand why DeFi is important from a regulatory perspective and all that. In terms technically, I think like Say protocol is doing great. It just, the amount of volumes on these other protocols just isn't significant yet. And I think the technology is different within the stack. Like I think that Say still has their order book. I'm pretty sure is on chain. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I just don't know if it would allow for the same throughput as DYDX. But we'll have to see when we launch. The goal is to have, if you think of any blockchain, and I discussed this on I see CryptoCito commented here. I discussed this on his podcast, how any blockchain, the bottleneck to that blockchain is the consensus mechanism, right? But having the order book, and like order books are the highest throughput, right? If you have to put an order on and settle that on chain every time you want to place an order, it's just impossible. Whereas settlement happens a lot less frequency, right? Because market makers want to place and cancel orders all the time. So what's really cool about the DYDX's new model and what exists currently centralized but will be decentralized is that you don't have to rely on consensus for order placement, right? Every validator will have a full version of the order book, will take in orders and be able to kind of place cancels, and then they'll be able to propose that on chain. So given that, I think that technology is the only one that will work for a full order book model because it is the only one that has the proper throughput that these high frequency traders need to be able to operate efficiently.
Yeah, I think this is what I can ask Dan Edelbeck from Sai, I think, next week or so. What a coincidence that he will be on the show next. But yeah, I totally agree with that. Taking it from there, we talked a little bit about, and I think what you just mentioned also goes with the advantages that we have discussed before when having the possibility to customize your blockchain as much as you like. Another step in order to launch your own chain is now also the question, what happens with the DYDX token? So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the DYDX token is an ERC-20 token as of now. So yeah, what will actually happen with the DYDX token? Like I believe you will need it to stake it to secure the chain. So what do the holders of DYDX token have to keep in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So currently the DYDX token is an ERC-20 token and serves two purposes. It's a governance token for all governance decision-making on the exchange. And secondly, it offers you a discount on trading fees on DYDX. On the next version of the protocol, it will have a lot more functionality. So in terms of how that token will be transferred, it will be native to the DYDX chain, and there will be a one-way bridge that you burn the ERC-20 token, and then you'll remint it on the DYDX chain. And then those tokens will be used to stake to validators to give weighting to like proposers, right? And the validator that will be the proposer will be based on whatever, like it's the one it's the same architecture that's built into the Cosmos SDK, which is a weighted round robin mechanism. And that will be weighted based on the stake to DYDX tokens to that validator. I could also see like other use cases for the DYDX token in the future, but that will be the main one. Yeah. And still be used for governance as well, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, still, so if people like would buy the DYDX token, like the ERC-20-based one tomorrow, they would basically exchange it at some point, like similar what we have seen, let's say, with ETHLend and Aave back in the days, like from a plat perspective, so to say.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And talking about new use cases for the DYDX token. So in Cosmos, we talk a lot about MEV these days. And this is what actually made me like very excited about DYDX coming to the interchain, because again, DYDX is such a huge player in the Ethereum ecosystem, and so much MEV has been generated on DYDX. Especially in 2021. So do you like have this also on your radar? Because when you were on Ethereum, it wasn't really possible for the DYDX token to capture all the MEV that is that got generated on DYDX. So is this also like something that you have in mind, like that the DYDX token could be able to capture MEV and distribute all the MEV to all the DYDX stakers? So generally, yeah, what do you do with all the MEV on DYDX after launching your chain?
Yeah, great question. So this isn't something that this is something that we're currently looking into. I think there are some unique MEV opportunities for the DYDX chain, given the architecture with the off-chain order books. And happy to talk a little bit about that. But yeah, I think there's a lot of really cool protocols like Skip protocol, and there's some others being built in Cosmos that do that MEV recapture. In terms of like where that recapture will go to, whether it's directly to validators, token holders, a treasury, I think that will probably be up to governance. But we are thinking about different ways that that MEV can be recaptured. Do I think that like MEV will be huge on DYDX? I think there will be some, like any blockchain. I don't think, and it's obviously always like incentivized to a degree, but I don't think it will be super significant. However, like it definitely will be there because there are opportunities for it. So yeah, we're looking into like different MEV recapture mechanisms. It will likely be up to governance to determine where that goes.
Could you elaborate real quick why you think that MEV won't be that significant on DYDX?
Yeah, I just don't know. It depends on who the validators are, right? If the validators are traders and market makers, then I think there is an incentive for MEV recapture. However, like validators that are just validating on chain, I don't think there's like a huge incentive for them to capture MEV.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is also like what we will see, and I think that's also could be like an interesting incentive for some projects to also, yeah, follow the path that you have pioneered. So in order that their token can also capture the MEV that the protocol generates. So this will be like a topic that we will need to follow very, very closely in this bear market. Speaking of bear market, one thing that really dragged us really, really deep into it was the FTX drama, which was obviously very, very hurtful for this industry. And now I think like this could, have you seen like some movements here and there in terms of user base? Because actually DYDX is like one of these decentralized alternatives for yeah, former FTX users. So have you seen some movements here and there in terms of new users coming to DYDX? And yeah, how do you generally see this topic with sexes versus dexes? And was this actually net positive for exchanges like DYDX?
Yeah, listen, like I said, I think it's like super unfortunate for the industry at large, just because I think we took a step back in terms of institutional adoption, in terms of like policy making, and a few other things. Or I guess like the DCPA was not exactly like beneficial for DeFi. So maybe a step forward in that regard, but DeFi protocols definitely need to step up. But yeah, in terms of DYDX's daily active users, our count definitely went up pretty significantly after what happened with FTX. I think people are starting to really understand, like, not your keys, not your crypto. I think like there weren't too many people on lending platforms. So when CeFi and Voyager and BlockFi went under, people and their lending platforms, right? So you think that if you're lending your money, it's at risk. So people weren't, I don't know, people were worried about that, but it didn't really stick. However, like when users deposit funds on an exchange, right, they think they're safe, right? They think that all those funds are stored in escrow or not being utilized by the exchange. So when FTX went under, I think it really is sticking that not your keys, not your crypto is true. And I think a lot of people are going to start moving to non-custodial protocols in the future. But yeah, our active user count increased pretty significantly and has remained pretty steady since the FTX collapse. In terms of volumes, they skyrocketed right after. I think they've subsided a little bit since, but I think like overall across the industry, volumes have gone down. So in terms of like for DYDX's like actual metrics, it was a net positive. In terms of like general outlook for the industry, I think it's like an opportunity for DeFi to really step in and push for proper regulation that that is beneficial for the industry at large and not just for these unregulated centralized exchanges.
Yeah, and I also agree with that, like in terms of conversations in Washington, for example, this was not very beneficial for the industry, at least not short term. And yeah, I think this, I think it was like super hurtful for most people. Also that we realized that some good discussions have been held behind closed doors. This was like super hurtful, but it also like motivates me that apparently more users came to DYDX shortly afterward. And speaking of new users, in order to hit the mainstream even more with DYDX, are there actually also new or more mainstream products that you are planning at some point to bring to DYDX, such as synthetics? Is this something that you have on your radar yet, or are you like, as of now, just focusing on shipping the new chain and adding all the assets that you can trade on DYDX today also on the new chain?
Yeah, so I don't think we'll ship anything new for V3. However, we are planning a roadmap of shipping new products once we launch V4. So shipping the new chain, hopefully mainnet will go live sometime in March or April. And then soon after, we hope to launch as top priority a spot product. The one difference there is it's a lot harder to launch multi-asset collateral and spot products on a new chain because for perps, you just have to bridge over the base currency, USDC, right? Which will now be which now will be native in Cosmos, the minting of USDC. In the future, you have to onboard all these different assets. So we're working on a solution to have multi-asset collateral, spot, maybe eventually options and some other products. And then obviously like adding tons of new asset pairs as well. In the future, I also think adding new asset pairs will be a governance and a community decision, whereas like people would like an asset to be listed, they could post on governance forums and there could be a vote to list that asset, which is really cool, which obviously doesn't exist on centralized exchanges either.
Nice. And now speaking of roadmap, where are we from a developmental point of view? So when can we expect the DYDX chain up and running? And what's going on with the testnet? So it would be like super cool to learn where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're breaking it down into milestones. We just released a blog post, which we can include in the show notes to after the live stream. But we released a blog post yesterday that we finished milestone 2. So essentially, we have a full internal testnet running with a bunch of different validators, trading fee, liquidation, Oracle price, static funding rates, token transfers, indexing, and API services are all complete. And we're currently have a fully working chain on a few asset pairs internally. We're currently working on milestone 3, which will include pretty much everything that's needed for a private testnet. So other advanced order types like stop limit orders, post only, reduce only, etc. Dynamic funding rates for all the asset pairs that we have listed, using features from the Cosmos SDK to validate blocks, web trading interfaces, documentation for validators for testnet. All of that is being done in milestone 3. And that should hopefully be done sometime in December. And we plan to launch the private testnet in January. And then public testnet soon after. So public testnet hopefully will go live in February or maybe early March. And then, mainnet launch in April.
Wow, that sounds very exciting. Also because like actually not in the not so distant future from now. But yeah, you guys have been working on shipping the new DYDX chain since a couple of months now. So is there like some advice that you could share with projects that are considering also to follow the path that you have pioneered with DYDX? Do you have like some advice to share or some lessons that were learned?
Yeah, I think that the ecosystem is extremely important that you choose. And I think one thing that like a lot of chains will face, specific and DYDX specifically did, is that a lot of the infrastructure that's needed to build the product just isn't there yet. So I wouldn't underestimate like the partnerships necessary, like external partnerships to the organization that are necessary to build any product, right? It's like the early days of the internet where like the infrastructure doesn't exist for you to build your product, right? So I think like a lot of what you have to do is like a lot of what you need for launch probably will not be built externally. So like being able to have influence and being able to work with other projects is going to be key. I think that's one thing to note. Um, from a more technical standpoint, I think that like I haven't been working very. I've been working with the team, but like haven't been super like super involved in creating the architecture. So I wouldn't be have the best perspective there. But from a partnership perspective, yeah, it's extremely important. Um, and I think that like when you're pioneering anything new, there can be you need a lot of resolve, right? Because like you don't know that this will work, but like as long as you're putting all you just gotta like focus and put your heads down and ship and ignore kind of all the hype, you know? And a lot of what has been difficult at DYDX is we want to make the current product as good as possible, right? But then there's this trade-off with building the new product. So um, I think that we understand the next product is the future of DYDX and the future of perps trading in crypto. And we know if we nail it, it will be the best product. So devoting more resources to that has definitely been our priority. While also like maintaining and trying to keep the V3 protocol in pristine condition. But that's kind of why we've taken some time off from like adding new assets and adding new product features on V3 because we're trying to build the best version of V4. Um, Although we have launched some things on V3 recently that have been super beneficial. Like we launched the fiat on ramp for the first time, and that's seen a lot of traction, especially in times since the FTX collapse, because I think a lot of traders that haven't really deposited through the Web3 experience, but are just depositing directly from bank account to a centralized exchange, are now doing that using the fiat on ramp directly to DYDX. But yeah, I think like my two pieces of advice in summary are like, one, don't underestimate like the amount of infrastructure that's going to be needed to build out an application specific blockchain. And then two, definitely like don't feel like don't I guess like try to devote all your energy to that and don't worry about adding new features to keep up and running on the current protocol, because once you launch the new version of your protocol, hopefully everything will show.
Yeah, and speaking of all of this, also like you mentioned V4. So as of now, your code is not public yet. But will you like open source your code at some point? I believe we talked about it like before the session. So could you like quickly touch base on this as well?
Yeah, everything DYDX will be fully open source when mainnet launches for V4. I believe we plan to open source everything during the public testnet phase.
Nice. Yeah, that's that would be like another like super useful hint for projects that consider also following the path that you have pioneered. So yeah, that's actually super cool to see. And before I open the stage for any questions, so if you have any questions for Paul, please put them into the chat and I'm happy to ping them. But before we do that, you mentioned we are in a bear market. Let's see how long it will last. So throughout this bear market, how do you view DYDX shaping the interchain in the next couple of years? And what is some general advice for people who just got started and figuring out their position in the crypto industry and are trying to wrap their heads around how to use this bear market as successful as possible?
Yeah, listen, there's still a lot of people building, right? And we've gone through these down cycles so many times. I've been in a few of them already. So yeah, I think my advice is just like stay heads down, building and optimistic. I think the protocols that are going to be building now are the ones that are going to be the most successful in the long run, the ones kind of avoiding the hype. Um, like right now it's like a really easy time to kind of take all steam off during the bear market and try to figure out something else to do. But if you figure out something that will be successful in the next bull market and are heads down building like DYDX has been, then you're going to be all the more successful. So I guess my advice is just not to lose hope and to just like stay heads down building.
Nice. Yeah, and very fitting to that. I have the first question for you, which also has somewhat to do with building. Andres, good friend of mine, also is asking, when is the testnet and how to get in? So apparently people are keen to stick in the industry and continue building. So how can people get involved in the testnet?
Yeah, so the public testnet, which will be fully permissionless, will open likely in February or March, depending on how the private testnet goes. The goal for private testnet is just to work out all kinks validator-wise. So then when the public testnet goes, it just hopefully smooth testing before mainnet. But yeah, there are a bunch of different ways to get involved. The like staking to your favorite validators, being able to hopefully do trading with Test USDC. And yeah, just being able to test out from both the API and the UX experience. Both of that should be live during the public testnet. So look out for announcements on the DYDX blog. More stuff should go and on Twitter, obviously. And yeah, everything should go live hopefully in February or March.
Nice. And could you like maybe from, because I think that's also a new term for many people. So what is exactly the difference between the public and the private testnet? So I mean, the name suggests something, but how can people imagine this that are not in the validator business at all?
Yeah, so if you can think about it, there's 4 steps to launch. There's going to be an internal test net, which are validators just ran by DYDX, basically just for like major kink testing, right? But that's all internal to DYDX to test out block speeds, just a few order types, which we've already built. The private test net rather will be a hand selection of maybe 10 or so validators. We're going to be running full upgraded processes. This test net won't be incentivized. And there are just some validators that we have open streams of communications with to do like major testing on the protocol. We'll likely have like a few liquidity providers providing liquidity and just like testing out trading features, but it won't be open to the public. It's just like a in-between phase between internal and public testnet to make sure that like we're doing an upgrade for the validator system in the public testnet with 100 validators, and that during the upgrade there's a major failure that just like hurts and slows down the entire system. We wouldn't want that. So just another testing phase. The public testnet will be fully permissionless, so pretty much anyone can run a testnet validator up to a certain amount that we cap, just so we don't slow down the consensus mechanism too much. And anyone will be able to trade on that using Test USDC, and we'll have a faucet for that as well. And then mainnet is using real USDC. Pretty much all the kinks should be out during the public testnet, and yeah, that will also obviously be permissionless.
Yeah, that sounds super cool. Also, that the testnet is at some point super permissionless. I think that's exactly the way forward, especially now during this bear market. And also, are there like any criteria in regards of infrastructure? So, are you like looking right now at some criteria to include? So, for example, there have been some problems with Hetzner, which is a server provider. So, like, is this something that you also have on your mind in regards criteria for validators joining the test and mainnet?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important, and there will be some infrastructure providers in terms of servers that we will recommend. However, like I said, I think validators have really great experience running their own servers, so we don't really want to change anything there. Although like the architecture is different and having these off-chain order books, pretty much everything should be the same from a validator perspective in running a validator as in other Cosmos chains. And that's mostly because we'll be shipping executables. So like all the code should be super easy to run. The hardware requirements will pretty much be the same. So yeah, I mean, we're reading into what works and what doesn't work, and we'll have recommendations. But I mean, validators and other systems have worked really well. So we're just looking to validators to kind of choose their hardware given our recommendations. And there hopefully will be a bunch of geodiversity as well when it comes to public testnet, just for testing purposes. But yeah, I don't think there will be many requirements beyond like the hardware requirements of like current Cosmos chains.
I see. Last two questions. I'm picking them up from Twitter, from the community. One question is, will DYDX be IBC enabled from the very beginning?
Yeah, so I believe it will be. I think for bridging, for example, like USDC, you'll need to bridge from like the chain that's all the stable coins are being minted on, and from Osmosis and from other chains through IBC to DYDX. To clarify, we won't be using interchain security. We're running our own validator set. But yeah, it should be IBC enabled.
Nice. And then last question for you, Paul. So, and the question is, when will DYDX be listed for the very first time on Osmosis? So I believe the question is all about, when DYDX will create the first pool on Osmosis and bring all the liquidity over to Osmosis. Is this something that is your priority, or
I think it's really important, obviously necessary for launch. So you could expect it by mainnet launch. I can't really give a more concrete timeline besides that. And yeah, I mean, it's a priority in the sense that it is necessary to run validators and for launch, obviously. But yeah, I think that in this phase, we're building architecture on validators, on onboarding and some other things. But since that is pretty much a guaranteed and architecture is already figured out, it should go live before mainnet, but I don't know the exact time.
Yeah, but what we can clearly see here is that cosmonauts are pumped seeing DYDX coming to the interchain. Lots of cool questions, lots of excitement, even though, the market sentiment is not in favor. Very, very cool to see. With that being said, Paul, thank you so much for joining the show. And I wish you a very happy Thanksgiving in the US.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Yuri. Thanks for everyone who joined. It was great.